My name is Jack Munayer. I'm the local coordinator for the World Council of Churches in Jerusalem. I run a program called EAPPI. It's an ecumenical program in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And I'm here with my colleagues who will introduce themselves, with Mr. Igor Kožemjakin, Ms. Ariel Markose, Mr. Ashraf Ghandour, and Mr. Loizos Loukaidis. And we have the task of covering in 45 minutes the simple topic of intersectionality and interfaith work with communities in divided cities. So this is the framework of the discussion that's about to follow. Everyone on this panel works in either intersectionality or interfaith, in mixed or divided cities. And I'm going to ask each one of the panelists here to briefly introduce the work that they do, or work that has been done on this subject. And one of the themes that we're going to keep in mind here, and I think it follows very well from the previous discussion, is transitional justice. And clearly we see here a process of coming together of different sides of the community that disagree or are separated by systems or socially separated, and are attempting to bridge the gap together. So why don't we start all the way on the opposite end of the table over here, Ashraf? So would you be willing to...
Yeah. Sure. Thanks. My name is Ashraf Ghandour. I work for Seeds of Peace. I've been with Seeds of Peace for approximately 3 and a bit years. I've been in the field of peace building work and social justice work for about 15 years. I live in Haifa. I'm originally from Beersheba. My parents are from Lod and Hebron. And I was raised in Jewish schools and got to know the dynamic from very close. And the scope of work that I do in Seeds of Peace is I run the global alumni community. Seeds of Peace has approximately 7,000 alumni seeds, we call them, in about 27 countries. My job is to get in touch with them, to check in on them, and also to help guide them through their journey of social justice and conflict transformation. We do this through a fellowship program, through our alumni program called Gather. Gather is basically our social innovation and conflict transformation sector, which engages people from inside the community and outside of it in those directions. We do this through an accelerator program, which is a fellowship that both Liel and my friend Sheila was just recently graduated from. And through that, we help these projects with sustainability, visibility, and strategy, and see how they can increase their impact and keep going in their very important work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, that wasn't about transformational justice.
No, that's all right.
We don't have much time, so I will continue straight on. So my name is Igor Kožemjakin, as I already introduced myself, maybe someone who wasn't here. So I am the Senior Advisor to Interreligious Council in Bosnia and Herzegovina, currently also taking a position of Secretary General, since one of our principles of work is rotating presidency over the council, something similar that is also on a political level of our country. But in a council we have also Jews. Jews represent national minority in our country and are not recognized by the constitution as the constituent people, so we have only an active vote right, but not a passive. We cannot be chosen and elected for certain positions. IRC was founded 22 years ago, actually 1997, and taking in consideration that the war ended in 1995, in end of the 1995, and that before the founding, it preceded some dialogues that need to be organized in between the communities. The Jewish community, which was not involved actually directly in the conflict, served some kind of a mediator between the other religious groups that are present, and it's mainly Islamic community, Serbian Orthodox Church, and the Catholic Church. So we try to serve as a mediator, but to help this process of re-establishing trust. We mentioned today very important concepts about trust and about leadership. So if we are talking about our country, Bosnia, our people do not have trust in political leaders, for example. Only 30% of our citizens, according to the Gallup's research, have a trust in political leaders. Unlike the religious leaders, what?
Like in all countries of the world, almost.
Yeah, but the religious leaders, on opposite, have above 90% of trust among the citizens. So we understood that they have to take responsibility for what they've done, since they wanted to show with the establishment of the council a couple of things. First, that it was not a religious war that took place in our country, that it was ethnic war, that because of the overlapping identities of religious and ethnic belongings, it seems that it has a religious elements. The other reason was that the religion was largely misused during the conflict, and the religious communities and churches admitted that they were misused, and that they felt as a kind of, they felt as a how to say, as a, they felt that they are regarded as also taking part of the guiltiness, because they have kind of a guilt in a segment of the moral sphere, because there is a responsibility for, there is not a collective responsibility in a sense of the crimes that happened, and who committed the crimes. The ethnic group are not responsible for that. There are certain individuals among these ethnic groups, but when it comes to the moral responsibility, there is a responsibility of all of the ethnic groups for the crimes that they've committed. So we are trying to, by the projects and for creating some positive narratives, to become really, we became a leader in a field of interreligious dialogue in our country, and we are also serve as a kind of the hub for the taking similar activities in our neighboring countries, because all of the region is affected. We cannot look at the conflict in Bosnia without looking at the conflicts in the surrounding area, because it is all part of the one conflict that took place in a land called Yugoslavia. So for us it was important to take, it took us some years to understand that this reconciliation is a process that takes a lot of time, that it won't be tackled with a few projects that we started. When I started 15 years ago, I think that we could resolve some very, very hard questions that we had in a society with the projects, but it is not the case. It is a process we now understand, so we try to lower our work into the local level. We have 4 levels of organizational structure in our organization. We have the assembly, which consists of traditional leaders of churches and religious communities, 4 of them, and they are our guidelines, let's say, and they give us ideas and guidelines about what they want to see the changes in the society. Then it goes to the executive board, which together with secretariat, who is constantly working on a daily basis on the issues, trying to develop programs and projects that will help the local communities, especially those who are divided, to transform into the social coherence local units. So we have 15 boards for interreligious cooperation, and they are throughout the country. They are on both entities, and even in the district, we have also one district, small town of Brčko. So we have 15 of them in both. They usually involved religious leaders on local level as a governing body, but they work not just with clergy, but also with just regular lay persons within the community, which is, we come to intersectionality, because we work with women, we work with youth, we work with the religious leaders, but also with people of faith from different professions, from different kind of different parts of the country. Very important principle of our work is a consensus. So all decisions are made by consensus. No outvoting, no. So it is a challenging, sometimes in the beginning it was a very, very, very challenging principle of work, but we found out and we created our own know-how because we didn't have the possibility to learn from someone. We emerged as the first interreligious council in the world. Afterwards, there were established more than 120 interreligious councils, regional, by countries, by regions, by continents. There are many, many of them, 120. But we didn't have a manual to learn from. So all what we learned is our own know-how, which we are now very happy to transform this to show-how, to help our friends in the neighboring countries, such as Albania, for example, which is a story of success. We managed to help to establish Interreligious Council in Albania, which is truly operational and functional. We also established a similar council in Kosovo, which 10 years ago, immediately after the conflict, and I mean not immediately, but after the conflict in Kosovo ended, we established a similar body, but it never came to life, to existence. It was just a forum of religious leaders who met once a year, and they didn't do anything on a grassroots level. They didn't, so now we are emerging anew. We want to also, because we organized recently a conference, regional conference, because our council is dealing with very hard issues now, such as the victims of sexual violence committed during the conflict, victims of rape. And it's not just women, what people usually think. There's a lot of men. Both men and women are victims, and from all of the sides that were involved in the conflict. And it is an issue because those people are still suffering stigma in their own local community. So our council was the first religious leaders to sign a declaration of abolishing stigma for persons who survived the sexual violence during the war, and it is really a pioneer project that we are trying to do. We also created a manual for religious ministers in order how to deal with these processes. We also monitor attack on religious sites, and by this we managed really to help the security in the country, because when we started 10 years ago, we had over 60 attacks annually. We came to the situation that we have not more than 8 attacks annually reported to us. So in that field, we really managed to help a lot. I will add, because there is not enough time. So some of the challenges that we really had, it's in the communities. We didn't manage to, local communities were resilient to our missions and visions. Especially the people within the local communities who define themselves as religious but not are really practicants of the religion, and for them it was very hard to attract them to our programs. And this is now what we are really trying to do, is to reach to that kind of people that declare themselves as religious but are not actually taking an active participation in their respected churches and religious communities.
Thank you. Ariel, would you be willing to share about your initiative you're involved in?
Okay, hi. Good evening. I think we're at good evening at this point. My name is Ariel Markose. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, but I was actually raised in Jerusalem. And I'm the director of an initiative here called the Jerusalem Model. And I kind of wanted to start by giving some context for how this initiative sort of came into being, because it was actually very organic from the grassroots. But it was born out of several intense and highly political events which deeply affected the daily lives of the residents of Jerusalem, starting with the kidnapping of the 3 boys in 2014, to the murder of Mohammed Abu Khder, to the street protests and demonstrations, to the Gaza war in 2014, followed by the knife intifada. All of these events were sort of a national context playing itself out on the streets of Jerusalem and affecting the lives of the residents of Jerusalem. And so this kind of trauma had some interesting consequences. It led to a heightened awareness and a deeper understanding that the city hadn't seen for a very long time, if not ever. And this awareness was expressed by an awakening, or like this awareness of the West Jerusalemites to the life and struggle of the East Jerusalemites. Many tolerance initiatives and campaigns were created. There was a strong liberal movement in the ultra-Orthodox community, which created an interaction between secular Jerusalem and ultra-Orthodox Jerusalem that we had also never seen before. There was a willingness to engage, led by community leaders and activists, which was totally different than the siloed, isolated communities that had been the norm up until this point. And so with this, there were many Jerusalemite activists that were coming to an understanding that the various sectors weren't going anywhere. Everybody was going to be here, and we had to figure out how to allocate resources and share space together. And so the Jerusalem model was founded in 2016. As it evolved, 3 initial goals were defined. First was defining and expanding opportunities for social entrepreneurs to meet and even work together with other activists from other sectors on pragmatic, practical issues, public transportation, culture, cleaning up the streets, collecting garbage, even that brought them together, brought them together under this sort of pragmatic umbrella. Strengthening civil society, this was really important so that its vibrancy was not dependent on a single political leadership or security situation, but rather could withstand, iterate, and flourish through changes of various kinds that the city tends to experience every few months. And raising the bar in professional excellence among nonprofit leaders and social innovators with emphasis on best practice and leadership succession across all the sectors. But really, essentially, our first real question was, could we even get everybody in the room? Could we identify civil society and leadership across all the sectors, really find out who these individuals were and then get them into the room? And we had to build this community individual by individual, meeting by meeting, and really kind of define what were the parameters that people would feel seen, that their needs would feel met, whether it was 3 languages, paying attention to the day that we were bringing, the date, the location, the level of kosher food, all these things that were minor details, but they made people feel comfortable to be in the space. Today, the Jerusalem model is a community of over 200 diverse individual activists from all sectors in the city, 44 different neighborhoods, who all ascribe to the core value and common denominator that Jerusalem's diversity is not her fatal flaw, but her most precious asset. And we essentially now do 3 things. We convene and build a diverse activist community, providing an opportunity to expand this pragmatic work between the sectors for the benefit of the city, providing seed funding for early stage initiatives that are the result of partnerships between model members. We always say we want to be there right in the moment where that idea comes into being, on that cup of coffee, or that moment where somebody jots something down on a napkin. We call them kind of oxygen grants. We increase the influence of those who see Jerusalem's diversity as a key competitive advantage of the city, but now among multiple stakeholders, working groups, connecting and building relationships between the grassroots and the city's institutions, connecting model members to key pain points in the city with their innovative pilots and ideas. And this is just the start of this work. And advance and demand professional excellence, always professional excellence, just being the best that they can possibly be, providing them with the tools, deep education, training, coaching, capacity building on all fronts, so that they're really just at the height of their field. And going forward, and I'll finish here, is that now we have this community, we're exploring, because that was really the first step, could we even do this now that we are sort of maintaining this community on a regular basis? What's the influence strategy of the model? What's the competitive advantage of a network like this in the city? What does it have the power to accomplish? What does it have the power to leverage? And then how does that play out on municipal or political level? How does that play out in the influence on the municipal infrastructures? And also continuing on the practical level for a better reality for all the residents in the city today. There's definitely a lot to be done, but we're optimistic in the relationships that are being built and the awareness and attention that's starting to form within the institutions in the city, and as always, in the resilience of Jerusalem civil society. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. Loizos, would you please?
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Loizos, I'm from Cyprus, and I'm the Educational Programs Officer of the Association for Historical Dialogue and Research, which is an NGO based at the Home for Cooperation in the buffer zone in Cyprus. I want to start by referring back to how I came to teach and facilitate workshops in peace education and coordinate projects and actually presenting conferences like this. Like, as was mentioned before, Cyprus is still divided. Of course, this was a result of foreign interventions not only by Turkey, but also by Greece, and intercommunal strife in the 60s and 70s. So I grew up with a mother who was displaced from the northern part of the island, and the father who grew up in a mixed village in the south. So when I was in school, teachers would ask me, Loizos, where are you from? And I would say, I'm from Zogarpaso, which is my mother's village in the north, but I temporarily live in Kuchia, which is the village that I grew up in the south. So I saw that my teachers fancied that, and it was as if I had won the lottery. Because this was an organized effort to maintain inextinguishable the memory of what has been lost. At some point, I realized other kids would also say this line, kids who were like children of other refugee people or children who lived in refugee settlements. So I was trying to find other ways to impress my teachers. At that point, like writing in secondary school, writing articles in school magazines on how the Greek Cypriot side should equip ourselves with more armaments in order to defeat Turkey and so on. So this is the sense of security that we grew up with, that we need more armaments, we need more guns in order to protect ourselves from the historical other. And this is also a result of an organized effort from both parts to construct different and exclusive national identities through the educational systems. That is another reason that I think that confidence-building measures are needed in order to bring together people from across the divide in Cyprus and elsewhere. So then when I went on to study to be a teacher, a referendum was put forward to the people of Cyprus to vote whether they wanted a solution or not. As the majority of people in my community, I was a supporter of the no solution, meaning no reunification. The majority of the Greek Cypriot side said no, the majority of the Turkish Cypriot side said yes, and the island remained divided. In the meantime, I started studying peace education. It was in 2004, and it was called the Annan Plan referendum, which was put forward by the UN. So it failed, and Cyprus is still divided, obviously. In the meantime, I was studying to be a teacher, and I was introduced to education for sustainable development, anti-racist education, human rights education, and I actually went on to study, to do my master's in peace education. So when I went back to Cyprus, I started following initiatives which brought teachers together from the two sides, and I started meeting the historical other. I started being introduced to the issue of multiple identities, which is something I work with today with teachers and students from across the divide, and started rehumanizing slowly the other. It was a very difficult process, deconstructing what I had been taught, but this had been the process for me and many other people who are slowly joining the reconciliation movement in Cyprus. I also became a conscientious objector while I was a teacher in public schools, and I was attacked verbally and in the press in schools because I was also against the commemoration of national celebrations in schools in the way they are being celebrated, meaning dressing up the kids as soldiers and giving them toy guns. So this is the case in Cyprus. So adding to the historical narratives, to the exclusive historical narratives, that's also our reality. So at that point, I traveled to Colombia, and I had seen how people were connecting peace education with other issues, such as social justice, such as class issues, gender issues, and I decided that together with my colleagues in Cyprus, this was the way to move forward, meaning to detach the notion of peace and the culture of peace from the traditional notion of reunifying Cyprus, which is obviously part of the peace-building process, but you cannot always work with that because you scare people off. You tell them peace is just meeting people from the other community, deconstructing your narratives, abolishing your national identity. Well, our way to move on, meaning incorporating issues of social justice, environmental sustainability, gender, proved to be a way to bring new people from across the divide closer to us. So at that point, and as my compatriot, the diplomat Mr. Vladimiru said, there are different technical committees working on different issues. So the Committee of Education was established, and we proposed this project called Imagine, which goes to schools, trains kids monocommunally in their own language, in their mother tongue, and then brings them together in the buffer zone, and they either play sports together or they work around issues of stereotyping and issues that have to do with gender, human rights. The project has managed to bring together, in the last 2.5 years, 3,700 kids from across the divide. For Cyprus, this is a huge number because we're a very small place. And now we're entering the third year of the project with sustainability actions and activities that will contribute to further contact and collaboration in the relationships and continuation of the relationships between the kids. We started with teachers, and this year we're continuing with head teachers. There are several challenges, and I'm going to finish with the challenges. But civil society is facing many problems in Cyprus, especially with people who don't trust what is going on at the level of the civil society. We have a very unaccommodating political climate, but what we do is actually knock on the doors of the people who are not converted. And this is something that also came up in today's workshop in the morning. So otherwise, we just work with our friends and our families, and this keeps our circle very restricted. So what we are trying to instill is this idea that we have to work across sectors, bring in this holistic understanding of peace that is not only related to our issue, promote hope to people that things can change up to a certain extent, yes, through civil society, before the political solution comes. And I'm very firm about this because we have seen it happening with children. I'm not going to wait for a political solution in order to talk about peace with children. There is a wall in Cyprus, and what we do, we know that we're removing the first brick so that they can look at each other. No more than that. But it is important, so we have no option. And as one of my favorite educators said, if we don't teach our children peace, someone else will teach them violence. So this is the option.
Thank you. Now, yes, you may applaud. There's so much richness here and so many different experiences, and I want to provide time for the audience to ask questions. So what I'll ask each panelist, if you could give 1 or 2 lessons, methodologies, points of thought that you have identified within your work that you see as key to moving forward in the work of intersectionality and interreligious work. So again, we're looking at 1 or 2 points that have stood out to you in your work, and if we could keep it brief so that we can invite in the audience. Let's start on this side, if that's all right. Loizos?
Yes. Well, I've already said that we follow a holistic approach to peace education that makes people feel comfortable and doesn't isolate the concept of peace only to a certain topic. And I think that's also more epistemologically more correct. And building critical resilience, meaning equipping the teachers with the capacity to stand up for what they believe and to continue doing whatever the political situation is.
Thank you.
I think I'd say there are 2 lessons that we've learned so far, and again, we're just really at the start of things, so I don't know if I have as much perspective. I think that part of building key relationships is kind of developing a sensitivity to language or an awareness about language. I mean, one of the early crises that we had were a group of West Jerusalemites offhandedly just calling Jerusalem the capital of the state of Israel without realizing how that impacted the Palestinians in the room. That's just a small example, but just a lot of sensitivity around language, and that helps create sort of trust. And the other thing is short-term wins, showing like short-term easy wins that are the fruits of a collaboration that impacts other people, and that you can talk about and say, this happened, we did this came together, this is a paper that was co-written, whatever it is, that starts to resonate back within the community. It builds trust, it builds sort of it builds good energy, and it makes people feel like they're moving forward so that they continue to work.
Working with the civil society, we tried to, what the lesson learned is basically when we worked within the local communities, 15 chapters that we have, we tried to also include other civil society organizations, but also the local administration. So we, in the communities, there are 7 that we succeeded to get the support from the local authorities. There is a much higher results, much bigger results in those communities because the relations among the ordinary citizens are much better. This is the most important lessons, to include as many as possible parts of the society, to include them into the dialogue, but also to work with all segments of society. So work with women, work with youth, work with religious leaders, but also with just, just regular, ordinary people within the local communities.
Mm. I'm going to go for a bit. Do you mind?
Go ahead.
Because you said 2, and I have 19, so I've isolated 3.
Okay.
I think within this work, and looking at this work, looking at the societies we work with, looking at the turnout that we have, and the nature of the turnout. I mean, raise your hand if you're Palestinian.
Yes.
Hi, Niveen.
Yeah.
It's been me and Niveen forever in these things, and I wanna isolate some main things that I know that those societies that we work with and that we hear their voices. It's my job to listen to 7,000 people. The first one is we're replicating structures and power dynamics that exist in the worlds that we're trying to remedy. Our oppressed constituents, our Sids who are Pakistani, our Sids who are Palestinian, etc., are dealing with a lot of white fragility, and they're holding that weight within dialogue circles. They're holding that guilt for them, so they want to say the right thing. That results in the second, which is a lot of dialogue structures today are about policing the tone of resistance and activism, which means you have to be nice with your resistance, you have to be nice with your activism. No activism works that way. I'm sure my friends from Ireland can testify to that. And the NGOism of activism and resistance, which means it becomes a 9-to-5 job, it becomes an institution. It's beholden to a board that is not usually diverse, is usually funded by Jewish American donors who want certain vision, and the way we sell them this vision is this is for the benefit of Israel, meaning anything that our activist seeds or other constituents are saying that it denies the Zionist dream is not peace language. And therefore, this is not intersectional work. If anyone is to listen to the social justice dialogue in Israel itself, you would realize that every time something else is raised in any issue, it just doesn't sit right while the occupation is going on. I'll give an example. In the recent women's protests, Palestinian women's protests that were happening in several cities and also around the world, as Berlin and Beirut, which started in Haifa with a group of female Palestinian activists, the ones who were stopping the protest and were kicking and pulling them by their hair were female soldiers, which were a result of the white Zionist feminism movement that was happening to put more female soldiers in the military and in positions of power. This is not intersectional work. And it's not even considered to be a hint of social justice. The same thing if you look at Israel as a whole in its activism. There's serious ableism, which results in the differently abled communities on Road 6 that are blocking the roads and trying to get their rights for the handicapable. You get that from different minorities. The Ethiopian struggle, which all of those struggles we feel, as Palestinians, we feel empathy for, but can't feel solidarity for because those people joined an oppressive body that is meant to oppress our existence and our identity. The same thing, our oppressed communities are looking at us and saying, how can you call for peace when there is no justice? And that's what they've meant since the 90s, and we've simply ignored it. If I was to be constructive about my comments, I would say two things only. Number one, I think Seeds of Peace and other organizations we've been speaking to have been working to actually strengthen the local and uninational dialogue. We have to look at ourselves as both oppressed and oppressive communities. Where are we oppressing women, for example, in Palestinian society? Where are we oppressing people of color? One of the things that occurred to me while my Irish colleagues and friends were speaking was, how ready is Ireland now to accept refugees? How ready is Palestine to accept refugees? Can we handle a Sudanese population, for example? Can we look internally towards that? I know the first conversation we're having is about women, and very closely second is our LGBTQ plus community. So how can we look at ourselves as both oppressed and oppressive based on intersectional justice? And then recognizing the power, privilege, and access dynamic. A dynamic, by the way, which we, from the start, perpetuate and replicate from colonial and white supremacist culture. Our access is to only people that speak English, who come from prominent homes. They bring often their cousins and their friends and their, the close circle of who is tied to these communities. Look at the people in this room, including myself, and the way I speak English. I would never have had access to this. I was raised in Shchuna Dalet, Be'er Sheva, which is one of the poorest communities, right? I know, it's funny when I think about it too. Even Julio knows it. Shit. Two. The second, I think, and Liel and I have these conversations often and all the time, the second phase after we've convened uninationally and have worked out solutions to our own, when do Israelis come together in a room and call themselves a violent, oppressive society? When did this happen? Since the 90s. Nonviolent communications went straight to Ramallah. It didn't stop in Tel Aviv, ever. When I see a uninational program that works with an oppressing community that way, I will start feeling hope. Phase 2 will be cross-border and international dialogue to find ways to actually dismantle systems of oppression that are affecting all of us. Example, toxic masculinity is killing more of me than it is killing women. My neighbor was just shot to death because of gun violence that exists and toxic masculinity that exists within my community. I have no forum that I can sit and tackle these things as a man or a Palestinian man. How do we build those forums once we've had a chance to do that? How can we build them cross-border and internationally? Thank you for giving me all this.
Thank you. Now, if we could take two questions to try and squeeze in as much as possible. So I see a hand up there at the left. Is there another question? Yes, and then on the right. So please go ahead.
We are talking about all these ONGs, cooperation, masculinity, feminism, and everything. But I have some questions. You are 5, and I will give 5 questions for each one. I really am interested in listening to your opinion.
Julio's being active.
One is, do you think that the problem between Israel and Palestine is about religious? The second question is, do you think that the religion is more a political problem or a business problem? The third one is, do you think that the problem between Israel and Palestine is about economical power? The fourth one is, if it's a political...
Can we just limit it so that also we can get some more questions in? Is that all right? So what's your third? Do you want to complete your third question?
Is it about
Is it about religion? I feel entitled to answer.
But hang on, can we also take, am I right to say Sammy? Sammy, go ahead.
This is a question for the panel, but I suppose it was
Ashraf, yeah.
In Belfast, we're just discussing today, we have a municipality that's working very well with Sinn Féin, who have also been seeing themselves the Catholic community oppressed, working with unionists, Protestants and others, delivering for their communities. And I often say, when I was in our parliament, our local council delivered more than we did the 6 years that I was there, from 2011 to 2017. And it strikes me, without saying this is what you should do, but if I was a Palestinian, I understand the difficulties about recognising Israel and all those other aspects, but for you to deliver for your community, would it not be better for you to be in there and to be working with others to try and get resources and funding and to your community? Because I imagine I come back here in 10 years, if I'm alive, that we'll still be talking about those issues we're talking about today, about the neglect, the lack of infrastructure, the poverty, disadvantage within the Palestinian communities.
Thank you. So we have a number of, wow, these are heavy questions. Igor, so you jumped forward, so would you like to start?
Yeah, I would
Yes.
like to start because I don't see religion at all in the heart of the conflict. Because do you know religions? Judaism, you know Islam? So where do you see the problem? Tell me where is the problem?
I'm talking about the conflict here in Israel because we don't have already a government and we are divided religious government and normal government. And if you don't balance these governments, how do you want to find a way for balance the problem between nations? And it's about more than that. It's about like, okay, see how the religious people here put the women under their feet. It's like the women are not able to decide.
It is not a problem with religion, but
Okay.
with its interpretation.
Okay,
It's not a problem with religion, it's a problem with its interpretation. You don't...
Igor, could you make your point, and then we can pass it around to other
I
members?
would like to give a point that there is no
So you're
I
saying
don't see
it's
it,
not,
yeah.
okay.
I don't see it as a problem. It is, in Israel, it has a... Okay, you may not disagree with me, but
It's
it
okay,
is
we
not-
all
it's
disagree.
okay.
I don't think anyone in this room
It's not,
Does anyone else want to jump in to address this point specifically on the religious aspect of the conflict?
I
It's 'cause
would,
I would
sure,
if it-
sure. There are a lot of things that we think are the source. The source of them are like extremism or religion or whatever. I can give like the easiest example. We often look to some of our constituents are from India and some are from Pakistan, and we often look at those countries and we think that your problem, and it's very easy to attribute it to brown or black skin. Your problem is religious extremism. While if you take it back enough, it's actually not. It was actually Christian colonialism that brought this kind of extremism. And moreover, our fear of Christian colonialism is what made us more extreme, more dubbul banat, take care of your women, wrap your women up and put them inside your homes. Why? Because there's a white man outside that's looking to take your land and rape your women. It's why the Hebronites have green eyes and are blonde. You know what I mean?
That's why we have frustrated.
Right.
I mean, I know we're enjoying it.
Thank you, Ashraf.
Swedish village.
So if I could come in and just make a quick point here, working
As a
in
representative of the church.
that's a dangerous title in itself, I suppose.
What is?
Representative of the church.
Oh. Which one?
I would say is that there were lots of initiatives post-Oslo for reconciliation, that the grant funding coming from overseas made it clear to distance the religious aspect of the conflict because it was perceived that religion was very much the source of the conflict. Therefore, if we have a secular solution, things should move better. And so I think, I don't mean to generalize, but I think that definitely within groups that have tried to build intersectional and interreligious work, well, intersectional mostly, this side has not been addressed adequately. And therefore, they have fallen apart over the years. we see very little work being done in this area because if you look at least perhaps the shallow statistics, most Palestinians and most Israelis hold a certain degree of religious identity that is very important and close not only to the construction of their identity, but their understanding of the conflict. And so I definitely think that the religious aspect plays a role in the conflict. Yeah, go ahead.
I can just also say though that religion, I'm speaking from a very, very local context, and I really can't speak to a national political context. But on a local level, it also can sometimes have the reverse effect. It can be actually like it creates a much more closeness than it is polarizing when it plays out in conversations around resources and shared understandings of those specific resources. I'll just give an example. There was an issue around here about the volume level of the muazzin call to prayer in Jerusalem. And it wasn't solved on a political level. It was solved by religious leaders. And I mean, it solved. It still wakes me up pretty often at 4:30 in the morning, but it's okay. You know, because there was a trust there by the people to the religious leaders, and how, like, even at this point in Jerusalem, the religious leaders are even removed from the political systems in a lot of ways, and so they can serve as peace brokers. So it's a specific example, and again, I wouldn't take this to like a national context, but I wouldn't also go to the extreme saying it's the root of the problem, because it also a lot of times can be a solution. And additionally, you have connections happening between ultra-Orthodox, there's some people in the audience who can speak to this, between ultra-Orthodox and the Muslim communities in Jerusalem that sometimes find some more common ground than their secular counterparts.
Can I add?
Wait, can we also let... Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, even though in Cyprus I don't believe that religion has been the source, the reason of conflict, I mean, because of like religiosity or affiliation to different faith, people came to be, let's say, biased towards the other. Because, okay, supposedly the Turkish Cypriot community is Muslim. It's mostly secular, but the impression we have about them is that, like, they're jihadists. And because the Greek Orthodox Church plays a major role in sponsoring activities that do not have so much to do with peace, I would say. A lot of them financial activities. But people will not stop believing. Religions will be there, so we need to invent ways in order to work through religion and promote peace and human rights. There are initiatives across the world, led also by people of religion, people who do not believe, atheists, whatever. So since we have this, religious education can be an amazing platform through which people can address issues of values and find a common place, like build bridges and connect, work across communities.
Thank you. I know that there's follow-up to this, but I'd also like to provide time for Sammy's question. Yeah, so Sammy asked, is it better to be involved in the local level, political, municipal, administrative levels, rather than distancing yourself? So the question very much of normalization. Does anyone want to jump in here on this?
I just have, like, very short, I think a lot of our constituents are finding out that yes. In particular, as a Palestinian, it feels a lot better, and that weight and that burden of working with your oppressor is not there when you're working for a Palestinian NGO or in a Palestinian municipality or an Arab municipality. There are NGOs. There's an NGO called the Zimam, who is sort of a descendant of One Voice movement, which kind of took on a more localized Palestinian model, which makes their work a lot easier now with the criticism and the BDS stuff and all that. And what they're trying to do is create movements of Palestinian youth in order to run them for municipalities or in municipal elections. And their work is super interesting. I'd recommend reading that.
Inside Israel,
No, they're in the West Bank.
So I can come in here as well. So I'm half Palestinian, but I'm a citizen of Israel. I grew up perhaps in a bit of a similar context to Ashraf. I went to an Israeli Jewish school, very much involved in the Israeli Jewish side. There was nothing more challenging to the other side than having to engage with me on a daily basis. And so I think that isolating and not being involved has definitely been harmful. But I think the issue for me is that I'm not seeing a healthy space where Palestinians are discussing this issue constructively. And so while we might all have different opinions on how we engage in this, my problem is that there's a lack of dialogue within the community about how to engage if we want to engage. And because I'm chairing this, I'll have the last word. We have clearly a lot of different experiences here, a lot of different work, and a limited time. I would encourage anyone else who has follow-up questions. I'm very sorry, sir, at the top left, who clearly wanted to follow up. So please feel free to come and speak to the different individual members to find out more about what is going on in these different cities.
Religion is a part of the problem, but also a part of the solutions too, generally speaking. Religion is a part of the problem, the conflict.
It's also can be part of the solution.
And part of the solution, because when you know effectively Christianism, Islam, and Judaism, the peace is an objective, of course.
And on that positive note, 15 minutes of coffee and a little less than 15 minutes of coffee and tea.